Thank you. Now, my name is Mistress Alizaundre de Brebeuf. I sing until forcibly prevented, but I'm otherwise harmless. I have been in the SCA since AS8, that's 1970, AS7, which is 1972. And I have been an SCA cook since 1973. But I was also one of 8 children. And I was raised on a food budget that wasn't even paltry. It was more like poultry because it was chicken feed. So I am very good at skinning flints until you can make little coats out of them. And I'm hoping to teach you how to do that with a feast budget. So we're going to start with the important things about planning a feast in my viewpoint. Remember, all of this, some other cook may tell you, is not only a lie, not only a damn lie, but so bad it descends into statistics. And they could be right, at least for them and the way they think. Add this to your repertoire and use it as you find it appropriate. I am not the goddess of anything. That's the disclaimer of the day. You want to have a feast that everybody will eat and enjoy. You don't want to break the baronial budget. And you want, if possible, to produce a feeling of past. The SCA is about the Middle Ages, but not a slavish reproduction of exactly what is written down, which is a minute fraction, boy, do I mean minute, of what was actually there. You want, or at least when I do it, I want to use what we know for certain as a springboard to what we can be reasonably certain of and go with that so that it is historically accurate, but there is novelty and freshness and variety to it as well. So when I start planning a feast, any feast, you begin with 3 things. One is the season of the year, and that is critical. Nowadays, we have the means to have roast beef in February and egg custards in January and strawberry pie in September. They didn't. If you look up research, if you look up and research the foods that were commonly available at the time and place that you want the feast to represent, you're going to be way ahead of the game in making it feel real. And you want it to feel real because you can't even get the site to cover the fluorescent lights. You might not even be able to get the gym to lift up the basketball backboard, but your feast can hide all of that to at least some extent because it's right and it doesn't cost money. In fact, it makes things cheaper, which is very nice. One of the ways that you do that is by making sure at least 90% of your feast is based on food availability, 1, of the place and time you're trying to aim for, and 2, of the place and time you actually are. It is not only that in France in May, you're serving strawberries. It's also that in Ohio in 2022, they're selling strawberries for peanuts. So if your feast is going to be held in May, set it in France in May in the year 1022, and you'll have a much wider range of food available to you for the amount of money you can afford to get out of people for this feast. If I were going to serve an SCA feast with roast beef and strawberries in February, I would have to charge people $25 a head. If I did that in May, I could get away with 10. And which do you think your people would rather pay, $25 or 10?
Yeah, 10.
So that's one of the first steps of it, because if you're using the food that is cheap at the time your feast is held, you're way ahead of the game. There is a caveat. If your barony will roast and serve the head cook if they don't have roast beef. Do not volunteer to cook a feast until October, because in October, roast beef is a glut on the market and you can get a bargain if you're careful. And then they'll think you're a goddess because they've got their roast beef that they have to have, and they're still getting a $12 feast instead of a $25 one. Now, the other part of Rob Peter to Feed Paul is how you use what you get. If there's time, I will also go in how you can source what you get from cheaper sources, but that is complicated and I don't know if we'll have time for it. I hope we will. If you are doing a spring feast, I'll use that as an example because that's the example in my article, which you can find at Stefan's Florilegium. That's Florigeum, Florilegium. I think I spelled that right. In May, chickens, spring chickens, they're called, become very cheap. They hit about the bottom of their annual price cycle because a lot of the spent hens from last year's layers that are not going to lay well this year are being sold into the soup and pot pie market, which releases a lot of younger, healthier, less stringy males into the fresh chicken market. So you can buy a chicken and you can just roast chickens. Lots of people do. There's nothing wrong with it. Or you can turn that chicken into 5 dishes. Now, I cooked a chicken and I thought a chicken, and I'm hoping if everybody's okay with it, because this is meat and I'm going to be chopping it up, to show you some of the tricks you can pull with a chicken. But I have to get permission from the people who are watching this that they're not going to be grossed out by seeing me chop up a chicken. Anybody who objects, please say so now. You can type it in the chat if you don't want to talk. I'll give you 20 seconds because some people type slowly.
I accidentally left the room. I missed your question.
Okay, I am hoping to cut up a chicken to show you some fun things you can do to get more foods out of one chicken. But I don't want to do it if anyone's gonna like start puking in their sink and go away because I was mean to them and didn't warn them.
Sounds awesome to me. We raised the quail for our feast.
I recommend that, by the way. Even in some apartment complexes, that's legal. It depends on your apartment, of course. So I am going to have my friend Maria take the pictures for this part of the thing. So her hands may shake a little. Please don't shoot the messenger, or in this case, the photographer. Let me just turn the camera around. And Maria.
Your mute button has been hit.
Okay, hello. We have Miss Chicken. Miss Chicken is what you normally get at this season, at the May time of year, because those, as I said, are mostly going to be younger cockerels. But it will allow us to show you what you need to see. So imagine this particular chicken about 2 pounds, 3 pounds lighter than it actually is. Just a second, I have to go get another knife. I am so sorry. Knife. By the way, one of the best gifts you can give to yourself as a feast cook is a set of really good knives. If you are poor, I'm poor, you want to go to a secondhand store and look for knives with rusty blades. They will be real carbon steel from the old days before stainless steel came in. And you can sharpen those till they would frighten a razor half to death. The most dangerous implement in any kitchen is a dull knife, because you're gonna make mistakes trying to cut with them, and you're gonna cut yourself or your photographer instead. It will
No.
be bad. So if you have a chicken, a standard chicken, one of the fun things that you can do to make more food out of the same beastie is simply to do something that the instructions are in every Joy of Cooking I know of. Even the later editions mostly have it. But if you can find one from before 1973, the instructions are better. And that is to bone it out from the inside out so that you leave the skin intact. So if you cut between the joints, which I am trying to do, by the way, my hands are not strong anymore. I used to be able to do that faster than I could talk about doing it, but now there's going to be pauses because of that. I do apologize in advance if it's a little more boring. What you do is you cut along the bone, along the back in the rear of the chicken first, so that you're sliding along the back of the ribs. And I haven't done this in years, so I might cut the skin, though ideally, practice on every chicken you use at home for any purposes until you can do this without cutting the skin, because it's much better looking, makes a better effect for the SCA's purposes if you have completely uncut skin for this. See, this wing is now still attached to the chicken, but it's no longer attached to the chicken skeleton in any way. That's what you want. You do the same thing on the other side. Find the bone, the joint between the bones, and cut there. If you have any professional chef's training, you are probably wincing now because my sleeve is touching the chicken and all kinds of bad stuff like that. Don't do that. That's me being old and creaky. That's not the way it's supposed to work, and you will learn how to do it without doing that as you practice.
Or your house will be hot enough so you can wear short sleeves.
Yeah. Remember, you wash your hands every time you switch chickens, every time you switch knives. There are things that you do not mess with, and salmonella is not your friend. When you have got the chicken boned out completely, which I am hoping to do pretty fast, but I don't know if I will manage it. You go along the sides of the wishbone up into the chest, and you cut again against the ribs themselves. You want to maximize the amount of meat that stays inside the skin as opposed to stuck to the skeleton of the chicken. The danger point is here on the breastbone. There is nothing but skin here on the breastbone, and you have to cut against the skin without cutting through the skin. The part of a main part of Rob Peter to Pete Feed Paul is that SCA people do not actually eat with their mouths in the sense of the flavor of the food is their primary motive. Or rather, the flavor of the food is a primary motive. I said that wrong. But the amount of food is not a primary motive. There are almost nobody attending SCA events who is sleep in a dung heap, eat anything slower than they are hungry. In fact, the vast majority of us, at least in the so-called first world nations, are significantly over-upholstered and could afford to miss at least a few meals in perfect comfort and safety. So they are eating to a regrettably extreme extent with their eyes, to some extent with their noses. But advertising, especially TV advertising, has taught them that what food looks like is of critical importance. So you see now that most of the rib cage has already been freed. And yes, there's a lot of food stuck to that rib cage, which we are not going to waste. Because in the Middle Ages, most of us, if we walked into a feast kitchen of their day, we would be beaten on an hourly basis for the sin of waste. We simply do not use a lot of the food we eat. It goes in the garbage disposal, it goes down the drain. If it's the right kind of food, it goes to a pet who probably doesn't need the extra calories. Hi, buddy. And that is a bad thing because they didn't do that then. So if you're doing that, you were robbing your diners of that experience of the use of all of the food in a chicken in this particular case, since I'm cutting up a chicken. Now, this is the hard part, which is to get into a joint that's way down here on the chicken. That is the thigh joint. And you have to find that inside and break it open without breaking the skin.
Do you need me to zoom?
Yeah, you might want to zoom for this because the joint is way over here in the back against the spine. And you're going to want to cut that joint and loose from the spine without breaking the skin. Now, you could hear me doing that partially. It just snapped or made a snappish sort of a bony sound. But the other part of it is there's tendons in there and you have to cut through the tendons. However, you can already begin to see what I'm pulling, which is that the skeleton inside this chicken is coming out of the chicken. And that's what you want. You're taking the whole inside out. If you can get the knife point into the joint in here, I'm going to see if I can do this from this side, which is complicated, but it will help. Cut around the wishbone, as I said. You don't want the pelvis, not the wishbone, the pelvis. Cut around the pelvis because that's coming out too. Get into that joint and separate the meat away from the pelvis and cut through right through the bone at the joint itself. Don't try to cut through the bone. It doesn't work. It always breaks the skin. You end up unhappy. By the way, if you do make a mistake and you slash the skin open, try not to sweat the small stuff. There's other things you will be able to do with it. But this is why you want to practice. And I haven't do this since before this whole miserable pandemic started. So I haven't done this. It used to be that I could whomp it out like lightning. Okay, I'm switching to a larger knife because this one just is not cooperating with my cold old hands.
So how does boning it that way save meat?
Well, because when you serve chicken the way almost every SCA feast does, which is as an entire chicken, you put the roast bird on the table, people cut off the best pieces, the thighs, the wings, the breast, drumsticks, of course, especially for the fighter types who want to wave them around and pretend they're Henry VIII. And then the entire carcass, and often the Pope's nose, which I like the best. Excuse me, that's a crude term from my childhood. Don't use it. The tail right there.
It is yummy.
It is yummy, but it gets left behind and then it gets thrown in the trash. And you paid money for that. So do you want it left behind, thrown in the trash? Does that serve you or your feasters to have that happen?
Nope.
Now we're going to stop as soon as we get this thigh uncoupled from the body, because otherwise it's going to take too long. There, that's going to go. There. Now, as you can see, we can now take this entire side of the chicken off of the chicken bones. See, it's kind of like peeling a glove, like that. Oops, it just split down the back. As I said, don't panic. There's things you can still do. I shouldn't have tried to undo one side, but do you see what's happened though? Can everybody tell what I've done? Somebody talk, you're scaring me.
You're pulling out the carcass while leaving everything else intact, which means you can make the stock or soup from the carcass before you cook, as opposed to waiting until after and taking the leftovers like you do at Thanksgiving.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's amazing. I've never seen anybody do this before.
Which means, especially if you don't damage the back skin the way I just, the breast skin the way I just did, that you have 3 dishes at least from the same amount of meat. You can get a pie out of all the meat scraps off the skeleton. You get the broth from the skeleton itself. And you can fill the peeled outer meat on this thing with stuffing, shape it back into a chicken, and cook it exactly as if the skeleton were still inside it.
My wife calls that chicken stuffed shirt, but she hasn't done it for me yet.
You can call it a lot of fun things, but the real joy is when you hand it to one of your senior people to carve for the high table and they realize suddenly that there's no bones.
Brilliant.
Yeah, even if you have a professional comedian for your court jester, it's not as funny as that. Now, if you look, it still has its thighs, it still has its wings. Stuff this, and it's still a chicken. See? Reasonably photogenic looking. Plump it up with stuffing in here, and it looks exactly like a stuffed chicken.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
And all of this would be waste if you roasted a chicken, because they won't eat it. They will just throw it away. They might not even ask you if you want them to throw it away. Why shouldn't you keep that in the kitchen and make it in a more feast? Now, I'm going to talk while I wash my hands because my hands are now really gross, and then I'm going to be back on camera.
And cold.
Yeah, they are also a little cold.
I'm going to go towards this chicken and give you other views.
Flat.
How's that? And now I'm returning to my former position.
Okay. I will now leave Maria to cook the chicken, which she was asking to do 2 hours ago and was very upset when I stopped her. And I will turn the camera around so I can talk to you again. Come on. There.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I only at the last minute realized I actually had genuine real chicken I could do that with. I seldom get so lucky. But most people can't understand how that could even be possible until they see it done. So I'm glad I had the chance. Now, from here, oh, everybody else's picture is turned off. I feel lonesome. That's okay. Yes, crock pot. Now, you can do that with almost any meat and with the vast majority of vegetables. If you buy, for example, a bone-in beef roast, like a chuck roast, which still has the bones in it, the bones make broth. If you buy a leg of lamb, the legs make broth. One thing I love to do, I also teach a class called Warner's, which is about disguised foods that you can actually eat. Turns out subtlety and Warner are kind of interchangeable terms. It depends on when in the feast you're bringing them out, which you call it. But one thing that I saw done with immense success was a castle made of blocks of ham. Somebody cut up a ham into cubes and built a castle out of the ham bricks, glued together with mustard. And then it had a flatbread roof with little, I think it was onion cracker tiles for the roof. And there's something so endearing about watching the royals reduce the ham castle that for reasons I don't understand, they usually insist on running at it with a knife or something, or a battering ram in one case. But it's all perfectly edible. If you have somebody who is a good cook but cannot get along with anybody, one way to make a feast much more authentic for the same amount of money is to have them make wafers or pizzellen or mandellen or whatever they're called where your feast is supposed to be from. Pizzelle irons are commonly available at Christmas time because pizzelle is a traditional Italian Christmas food. And they're not that expensive then, but you can often find them secondhand. And the amount of flour that would make 12 loaves of incredibly boring bread that everybody's seen 100 times before. Hand it to your annoying good cook. She can make them at home. She can get called up by the king and complimented on her lovely wafers, get her chance to shine, and there will be hundreds of wafers from the same amount of flour. You can do that all over the place. If you are making, okay, with vegetables, if you are making something with broccoli, for example, the broccoli tops can be used for a soft dish or a salad or whatever you've got the recipe for. The broccoli bottom should not be cooked with the tops because modern broccoli has a much more rigid stem to make it easier to harvest, which means that the stem does not cook at the same time of the broccoli. By the time the heads are just right, the stems are still half raw and they are crunchy and taste gross because they're not cooked. By the time the stems are right, the heads already reek of sulfur. You don't want that. Use the tops in one dish, cut the stem in thin slices and cook it separately. For example, you could put it in a pie where the tougher texture is going to be an advantage. If you want to make peas, now in May or June, peas are cheap, but it's still a budget breaker to use fresh peas. And besides, who are you going to get to shell 20 pounds of fresh peas? Buy 1 pound of fresh peas, shell them, cook them separately for high table. Hey, you know, the king and queen are busting their butts to look good for us. They should get the fresh peas, but put the pea pods in the water and boil them till soft, skim them out and put your 20 pounds of cheap frozen peas from the wholesale warehouse in there. They'll taste like fresh. Carrot skins can go in any broth. Carrot tops can make a magnificent French soup, which was so freaking common that a French cook who didn't know how to make carrot top soup, her husband would start having her exercised. The outer parts of the lettuce that are a little wilted and don't really look like they belong in that salad, there's a lettuce soup too. And you can use like the overgrown romaine leaves that are about as soft and tasty as leather in the carrot soup, in the lettuce soup, and they'll be fantastic. The skins of almost any vegetable that is peeled, if you wash the vegetables first, which you certainly should anyway, can be used in the broth to give it more flavor. If you have a great bargain on meat that looks kind of fatty, I mean, like it's a $4 difference between the price of this roast that has a thick layer of fat on the outside and the one that has been pre-trimmed by the butcher to leanness. Get the $4 cheaper a pound stuff, trim it yourself, and cook down that fat and use it as the fat for the meat pies. The pies will taste better. You will not be serving your people Crisco. Don't serve your people Crisco, by the way, it's horrible. And you already paid for that fat. You might as well be using it instead of throwing it away. Of course, if the two are the same price, you have a decision to make. Maybe buy 2 roasts with the fat and then 6 with none. Because don't buy more fat than you need. By the way, if you buy suet in the winter when they sell it cheap for bird food and keep it in the back of the freezer where it's really cold, it'll still be fine by May to make suet pie crusts. You can get lard pie crust from, if you know a butcher, you can get the trimmings from the pork that other people aren't really that fond of anymore. Lard is far healthier for you than Crisco and other vegetable shortenings, by the way. Our bodies are designed to digest animal fat, and they are not designed to digest hydrogenated fat, which is, I am not joking, a form of Teflon. It's not the same as the Teflon in your pans, but it's close enough that you shouldn't be eating it. You can do the same thing with chicken fat. In fact, if you order chickens from a slaughterhouse, and if you have a slaughterhouse, see if you can order chickens direct from the slaughterhouse. Maria, in the freezer, can you get out the chicken feet? Chicken feet make fantastic broth. I realize it's chicken feet. You don't want to think about chicken feet. Yes, chickens used to be a real live birdie that went flap and squawked and pecked your ankles. And they do have feet. And if you're buying slaughterhouse chicken, tell them you don't need the feet removed. You get a cheaper price. And they last in the freezer up to a year. They have been scalded. The outer coating, which is where any possible dirt would be, has been already removed. All you have to do is drop them in the pot and boil them for their flavor. And afterwards, you can give them to, well, maybe a cat to gnaw on. I wouldn't give them to a dog except Newfoundland, who have stomach acid that can peel paint off a Buick. But oddly enough, you can give them to a lot of people from Central Europe afterwards because they were raised on chicken feet broth. And it was a treat to be the one mama chose to get to eat the chicken feet afterward. Unless you have your barony very well trained that no matter what you serve them, it's going to be edible, don't put the chicken feet out as a separate dish. Wait that for your 7th or 8th feast when the people have been beating the jungle drums for you. Oh, I got 8 guys from my dorm at college to come because I told them you were cooking and I told them how you always make this great stuff and so much of it. Then you can get away with that stuff. One of the basic principles of a Rob Peter to Feed Paul feast is that if it looks blue plate special at the local diner normal, it looks like the kind of stuff the lady in the pink dress will slap on the counter in front of you and say, $5, it's the special. Then you can make it smell or taste a little odd and they'll eat it. Because as I said, most modern first world people are tasting their food more with their eyes than with their actual taste buds. So the fact that it looks normal leads them to expect that it will taste edible. And they'll risk it, even if it smells a little odd. But if it is the least bit bland or boring, or maybe this is a filler and it's a lot of starch and it's not that magnificent, then you make it look really weird. Because they'll take a taste because it smell it and it doesn't have any bad smell to it at all. It smells like, I don't know, is this porridge or is this just pie crust? And then the fact that it looks like a dragon or a mermaid or a castle or fill in the blank, get as crazy as you like, they'll still eat it. Okay, broths. Oh yeah, these are canned broths. This is something, Meyer chicken broth in the box. It's about $3.50, $4 for this box, unless you find a fantastic sale. It still comes in cans, which can be stored for 4 years instead of 6 months. It's not the same brand. It tastes as good. Canned broths are one way to save big money. I highly recommend them. Check the per ounce prices on everything. You will find the strangest things are a lot more money than you thought they were, and even stranger things are a lot less. And if there's any way you can get to them, go to ethnic groceries. I can get dried chestnuts, which have been pre-peeled and are ready to soak overnight and then run through the blender, for peanuts at a Chinese grocery at certain times of the year. And instead of having some poor sod who's going to hate your guts, sweat blood, breaking the hulls off all the chestnuts you bought at Christmas and then forgot on the counter and they're half moldy, and then having to simmer them until the skins are loose and can be peeled off, and then still having them taste funky because he had to cut the mold away. Just buy the dried ones at the Chinese grocery, which last 2 years once they're dried, 5 if you put them in the freezer. And you can make that chestnut torta just the same for 1/10 as much time and effort and half the money or less, depending on how bad Christmas chestnuts are where you live. When you are planning a feast, think of a feast as an edible jigsaw puzzle. Basically, all the food that you do not use in one dish from any given plant or animal gets snuck into another dish. For example, you can serve a roast of beef, and there are times you want to, especially if the king says roast beef or die. But if he says beef or die, you could serve him, for example, hedgehogs, which are little meatballs with almond slivers stuck in them, so that when you cook them, they look like hedgehogs. With the same, it's got beef. He'll taste the beef. He'll like it. But the difference in the cost between the hamburger and the beef means that you can buy more food. You want that. Anything that comes with bones that you do not actually eat. If you serve, for example, a big roast of, well, let's be extravagant. Let's say he wants prime rib. You make a prime rib. You slice it paper thin, you'd better, but you've got this rack of bones. You can now take someone who is very enthusiastic and strong, fighters usually volunteer if you ask sweetly, to crack all the ribs and make marrow broth for the third course 2 hours from now. They don't know you didn't spend a fortune on marrow broth, which costs the earth. They just know they got this magnificent gravy for the third course. And you smile sweetly and say, oh, thank you, and shut up. Another important thing to remember, especially in the modern world where people who have allergies are no longer just hiding at home and saying, oh, I don't think I feel up to going. They're going and contacting you ahead of time and saying, hey, I can't eat wheat. Will there be food I can eat? Do not put the same thing in everything, no matter how much you love shallots. As sure as you decide on an allium menu, the princess is going to tell you that her mother's coming and she's allergic to garlic. If she's allergic to garlic, she should not be eating shallots or onions or chives or Egyptian walking garlic or not even ramps. Frankly, anybody who eats ramps may be safely suspected of having other bad habits, but that's beside the point. Make sure that each course has at least a meat main dish, a meat-free main dish, and if you're going vegetarian, cut out the middleman, go vegan. You'll cover twice as many people with no additional expense, and why not? Something soup or soup-like, a vegetable or 2 vegetables, better still, a drink, a starch, and something sweet. The something sweet does not have to be a dessert in the modern sense. They almost never did that. They had raisins in the main course and meat in the dessert. And you can do that. But if you are careful with your flavoring, so that the stuff that smells weird looks normal and vice versa, delete it. One important thing about Rob Peter to Feed Paul is that you always serve the very most expensive stuff while they're still hungry, if you got a bargain and it's plentiful, because they'll be impressed as hell, or in the last course if you don't have much of it. Because by the third course, they're going to take 1 slice of roast beef and they'll still be impressed because you served roast beef, but they're not going to take 6 slices of roast beef because they've already eaten a third of a chicken, 2 pies, 3 bowls of soup, 6 different vegetables. You get the idea. Okay, where are we? We're at 7:45. I'm going to pause for a minute. Does anybody have questions? You can put them in the chat if you don't want to unmute themselves because we are recording. I'll answer them anyway. I know how to read. It's amazing. Is there something that I covered that confused you or something that I didn't cover that you want to know about so far?
Can I adopt you as my mother?
You certainly can. I don't have any living daughters.
Our barony was basically, there is a person in our kingdom who I otherwise admire, but he has the attitude when he teaches classes on doing feasts, that, oh, don't expect to even break even when you do a feast. And several people took classes from him. So trying to get them to see the light of what you are preaching is like pulling teeth.
Well, you can play them the recording.
Yeah, a couple of them, I'm going to steer them towards you. And an observation.
Yes.
With regards to allium allergies, because I've had people allergic to garlic, people allergic to onions. My substitute in that case is the herb savory, because it brings that same sort of flavor profile without sending them to the hospital.
Thank you. That's new to me and useful to know. Bless thee, friend. Okay, that reminds me of something. A lot of people cannot stand fish, and it's not that they have a fish allergy. It's that most modern Americans, especially, God help us, and a fair number of Australians I met, have no clue how to cook fish. Fish is not bad to taste, it's bad to smell. If it's overcooked by even 1/10 of a second, or if it's cooked at all in an environment with no ventilation, fish smells bad as it oxidizes. If you want to serve a Lenten feast, get little fishies, sardines, if there are fresh sardines where you live, or any other little fishies. You can use whiting, you can use alewives if you live in New England, you can use any small local fish. If you're miles and miles inland and there are little trout available, those work too. Little squids do not work for this. You cook them in a pastry case. It seals them away from air. There is no fishy smell. People who will not voluntarily go near a tuna fish sandwich will eat them. And if they're still a little sensitive, hyssop, Hyssop, the herb, conquers fishy smell without introducing any strong adverse taste of its own. It has a flavor, but it's a flavor that marries fish so well that they'll still be holding hands at 70. So that's just a way to sneak fish into your feast if it's supposed to be a fast day. Now, mind you, you can still have meat if you use the excuse that the local bishop has said that the queen must have meat because she is of a delicate constitution. And of course, she's going to share with her subject. You can come up with a good story. But if there is at least some fish, or especially if you want to do a real Lenten feast and the other dish is vegetarian, again, you are trying to pull people into the past. Anything like that you can do helps erase from their minds the basketball hoop, the guy who just wandered in off the street in the day-glow nylon last Avatar outfit with the lit up battery-powered crown on, etc., from their minds. And that is at least as valuable to you and to the group as anything you can do in reducing costs. Besides, as I've already mentioned twice, I think, maybe 3 times, in which case I apologize, people are eating with their eyes as much as with their mouth, and their taste buds are being influenced by their ambiance. If you have people singing, "Summer is a coming in, loudly sing cuckoo," and they're eating strawberry pie or some other strawberry dish, depending on where in Europe or Asia or whatever your feast is supposed to be from, and it's May, you are dragging them back into the rhythm of the seasons, the flow of the year, a time when you could not airlift grapes from South America for Christmas, and so on. I apologize to anybody from Locock who can get perfectly good grapes for Christmas. They are seeing, eating a slice of a day when the time of year mattered immensely in what was available. And that makes it more real. You're trying to make it real. Another part of doing that is the issue of disguised foods. As I said, if it tastes pretty normal, you can get away with making it look weird, and you want to, because they're expecting spectacle. They know that medieval feasts had funny looking stuff, had castle pies, had hedgehogs, had dishes made out of sugar plate. I have never been able to make sugar paste work. When I make sugar paste, it always turns into wallpaper glue. But many people can make sugar paste. They can even make the candy dishes for the end of the meal out of sugar paste and then warn the king and have him pick up and eat the dish. One relatively easy example of a disguised food. You can partially pre-cook a roast and then chill it really cold, slice it with a slicer in a beautiful thin, even slices. And then you soak it in a solution of salt, only about like 5 to 10% salt max, briefly. This is maybe 5 to 10 minutes, depending. And then tie it together and finish cooking it. Salt turns some of the meat protein into a kind of meat glue. So the roast will now stick together even after you untie it, if you're careful. You can then bring it up to high table and present it to the king's best knight. Usually the king's champion works great for this and says, as the king's champion, it is your duty to cut the meat for your lord. And he touches it with the knife and it falls into this row of beautiful neat slices in 1 second flat.
Brilliant.
And it costs you nothing. Well, it costs you about 10 cents worth of salt. Most of you can probably manage that. Another example of the same thing, same sort of thing. If you have where you live a lumberyard rejects store, or an overstock and defect section in any lumberyard might have one. What you want is to get a big flat door. A wood door with a foam core works great for this, but you want one that does not yet have a door hole already in it. Because what you're going to do is buy 6 metal cleats of the kind that are used for conduit, screw them to the bottom, and then paint the life out of that thing with food safe polyurethane. Then you're going to screw molding, if you can get it, some kind of carved molding that looks really impressive. If it's thin molding, it's pretty cheap, even if it looks glorious. Get that nailed onto the top surface of it, opposite the cleats, and food safe polyurethane it again. Because someday a piece of that molding is going to separate a little tiny bit from the table under it, and the door under it, and you want that leak to have food safe polyurethane on both sides too. Now you have a great big tray. The only problem with a great big tray is you have to make sure that door will fit through the kitchen doorway of at least your 2 most popular sites. Or you will have to have trestles outside the doorway to load everything on with a screen to put in front of it so that the clients, the feasters, don't see what you're doing until you've done it. You use 2 oak closet poles. Do not skimp on the cheap stuff. You want real oak. Through those conduits, hoist it on the shoulders, and they carry it out. I mean, 10 pies for 10 tables is 10 pies for 10 tables. Wow. 10 pies piled on your great big tray, carried out all at once. That's a lot of pie. And each table is only getting 1 pie. They won't pick that up. They won't process that as a bad thing because they've seen that there's all these pies being walked up. You can do that with almost anything. You can do that with
something like that with we made the tray was glass. We had a sheet of glass and then just put wood around the edges and framed it in and then stocked it up with, we put gingerbread cookies in the shape of reindeer and ice cream cones. We put icing on and then put a bunch of Mexican wedding cakes on it and made a whole winter scene. It was pretty
Uh-huh.
cool.
Yep. Now, with a glass tray, I would only do that if I could set a feast in Venice or at least southern Italy, where glass was cheap enough for you to get away with that. Because there were huge parts of the Middle Ages where a sheet of glass that big would be, I am not joking, a queen's ransom. But for a Venetian feast, that's, look at us, we've got all this glass. And people will get the connection, even if it's subconscious. And you do want to create that kind of scenes. One feast, this is a very, very, very long time ago. Some of you weren't even born, but I got hold of 50 pounds of chicken legs at 40 cents a pound. Oddly enough, if you go to the right slaughterhouse, you can still do that sometimes at the right season of year. But how do you make 50 pounds of chicken legs not look like you bought 50 pounds of chicken legs and the hell with you if you want anything better to eat? Well, we had someone, Food Safe Polyurethane is your friend. He had an enormous bucket of old solid steel nails, no coatings of any kind. And he drilled an unbelievable number of holes in the backside of a sheet of top quality tabletop plywood that had been sitting in his barn for 20 years. He bleached the hell out of it, drilled the holes, put the nails all through it, and it would fit on the great big tray. And then we just stood each of the chicken legs up on one of the nails and fitted cooked broccoli spears in between them. Somebody who had those things that you drill through pieces of food to make a ball. And he made little white radish helmets for every chicken leg and gave some of them celery stick spears. And this whole table marches on Dunsinane right up to the head table with turnip shields on their arms on the outside edges. And the crowd went wild. The entire thing cost less than 2 diners' feast fees. Yeah. And did they notice that they were eating Rotgut grade cheap chicken legs? And by the way, the 20-pound bag of white radishes were on a discount 75% off because some of them had wilted. They're easier to cut out the helmet edge of if they're a little wilted. Oh, well. Oh, by the way, you can make soup out of radish leaves too. So what time is it? It's 19:58. We're about to get into the second half of this. Anybody have any questions or comments now? Okay, and that's local time, by the way. So I'm in Ohio, which is East Coast time, oddly enough. So if you are not in my area, I'm confusing you. I do apologize. So now we get into the part, I hope none of you are easily grossed out. But if you are, please ask me to tone it down and I will. But this is important and it really, really works. The other way you get more food for less money is sourcing. Specifically, you cannot think in terms of grocery stores. You can't. Grocery stores are for people who want to make dinner for the family. You are thinking like a medieval cook. You are cooking not for a family, but for a lord and his many, for a castle, for an army. You have to buy your food on that basis, which means find out the location of your town's wholesale vegetable supply. If you live in a very rural place, that might be going to a farmer in April and saying, hey, what do I have to pay you to get you to sow a 20 by 30 plot with radishes? Assuming, of course, you want that many radishes. But almost any vegetable, if you contact the right local farmer who's struggling, you can probably, with a guarantee that they will get paid for the crop, get them to grow a 20 by 30 plot of something for you. And it will cost less than it would cost to buy it at the grocery store. So if you want to get one of the magnificent antique French lettuce varieties that come back on the market and make lettuce soup enough for 500, contact the local 4-H. Find out if there's a 4-H kid who would like to do a 4-H process growing a medieval garden for you. The chances that there will be are very, very high. If you contact them in January, a community-supported agriculture farm might be willing to do the same thing, depending on their land mass. They may have every inch of their land already committed to other stuff, but they might not. They might have a corner that they've never bothered to plant because they're already getting all the customers, all the food for all the customers they have. If you offer them another customer, you can get some pretty weird things. And if you have any land at all, and it doesn't have to be a lot of land, you can get a 10 by 5 foot plot of land from a recreational department of your local city, what do you call them, parks and recreation thing, the community garden plots. And a 10 by 5 plot can grow you an amazing amount of stuff. There are some exceptions. If you live in North America, I don't care how much you want to do a 1300 English feast. You are not planting skirrets. Yes, skirrets were the great English medieval root vegetable. Everybody planted them, everybody ate them. They were so close to ubiquitous, they made Irish potatoes look like a side comment on the edge of a margin of a manuscript. They are an invader species. The second they step foot outside of their native environment, they kill and kill and kill and kill. They spread like wildfire. They displace local plants. The local animals don't recognize them as food and won't eat them, and they starve because they displace the food those animals can eat. Don't do that. If, on the other hand, you plant them in a barrel on your patio so that you can burn the soil in a fire pit after you harvest the skirrets, then you can grow skirrets. But skirrets will regrow from root fragments smaller than baby hair. So you are going to burn the soil in a fire pit after you've harvested your skirrets. And no, as far as I know, you cannot buy canned skirrets, although things may have changed in the last 8 years since I last checked on that. Wouldn't it be great if you could just order 10 3-pound cans of skirrets from England and serve them at the feast and snicker madly when everybody goes, what on earth is this? But there are lots of medieval vegetables that are naturalized in America. Stick with those mostly, unless you know you can be careful enough with skirrets to get away with it. There are a few other common fruits and vegetables that you can have the same problem with. Rosa rugosa, sometimes called the Robin Hood rose. Yeah, making your own rose water from Rosa rugosa, it's fantastic if you live in Europe. They're an invader species in North America, and I think in Australia and New Zealand too. And birds can carry them 1,000 miles. You will never see the horrible things you have done to some island you will never visit. So don't do that. There are other roses that don't spread that way, including some damask roses that make just as good rose water. Stick with those. But in addition to butchers and the vegetable places, the vegetable warehouses, ethnic grocery stores, the 4-H and the farmers markets, make friends. Show them pictures of what you're planning to cook. Give them a recipe using the weird ingredient you're after. Talk up the SCA. For one thing, you might hook a bunch of new Scadians, which is not a bad thing. But for another, they want to be part of something fun and weird that they can talk about, because how many times can you discuss the time the tractor turned over on Uncle Mike before the people at your church want to hang you for it? If instead they walk in and say, you'll never believe what I'm growing for this weird guy from the city. Hey, they can eat out for a month on that story. And when you come back and serve them the radish jam or whatever odd thing you've dragged out of some cookbook from the corners of Italy, they will beg for the recipe and grow the stuff again just so they can then serve the radish jam at the next church potluck and explain again about the weird guy from the city. Give them photographs of whatever you made. They will pass them around. They will talk about them. The SCA will become a familiar thing that is full of harmless, weird people who do wonderful, interesting, exciting, strange stuff. And when you need to hire the Grange Hall for your event because the church fell out from under you on 15 seconds notice, they'll go, oh, hell, I know that guy. Damn, he's nice. Of course we can let him use the Grange Hall. Oh, hush. My friend is quoting a song called Harmless Historical Nuts, which you probably can look up on YouTube. And it's a funny song about the SCA and making us sound harmless. We are harmless, but we don't always sound harmless. And it's an important difference. I'm going to describe a couple of tricks that I have pulled. Yes, it's Leslie Fish. That's exactly it. One of my current tricks is that I am on the sheriff's call list for roadkill deer. Now, if you are not poor, don't do this. It is not right to take food away from people who may not see any other red meat all year. But if you are poor, so that every last scrap will be used, you can divert some small percentage. What happens is the sheriff calls everybody on his list until someone says, yeah, I'll go get that deer the truck just hit, take it off the road, clean up the mess, make the road safe again, and I get the deer in exchange. When it's your turn, make sure that you bring good rope, a sled to load the deer on in case it's heavier than you thought, a tarp to put on the floor of your car because blood in the carpet is not only disgusting, but it smells bad forever. Get the deer off the road as fast as you can and then go toddling off happily. You are not going to butcher it in the usual way unless you already have a friendly butcher. Now, the second or third time you show the butcher the film of your boning out chicken's bones without actually cutting up the chicken, he's going to decide that you're fun. And he might be willing to dress a deer for you out of his usual deer dressing season. Because in deer dressing season, they got 15 hunters at their door saying, mine's next. And they do them all and go, whew, that's it till next year, thank God. But if you show up in June with a deer, they might say, oh, I don't know if I want to unpack that equipment right now. Well, if they're your friend, they will. And they won't charge you more than they do the hunters in November and whenever. If you can't do that, the best way to butcher a roadkill deer or the kid that somebody bought their kids as a pet, but now he's bigger and older and he's butting everybody in sight and he's going down, or whatever quadruped you get your hands on for cheap. You have to make a tripod out of anything. You can buy tripods that are portable that are used by hunters for this purpose. You hang the thing up by its back leg so its head is down and you bleed it out. Depending on how it died, it may be bled out. We got one deer that the truck had beheaded. And by the time we got to it, there was not a drop of blood left in that deer, and every inch of the meat was perfectly safe. It was marvelous. Yeah, yay! Okay, we have time for a small digression. We were on our way to an event when we saw that. We went to the nearest store, this was before cell phones, used the payphone to call the state police, asked if we could have it. And they said, yeah, sure, we'll come out. And the people at the lunch counter at this little store at freaking dawn, these are elderly farmers in, gimme feed corn caps with baling wire and bubblegum patch trucks, looked at myself and my young son and said, you gonna haul a deer alone? And I said, well, my son will help me. And he said, come on, boys. And all these creaky old gentlemen piled in their own trucks and went back to the deer with us and dragged it up onto the roof of the car and tied it down for us. Bless you guys. I wish I knew your names. It was Indiana. That's all I remember. Well, we then had to take it to the event we were on our way to. So we drive to the event, and I found the autocrat and said, look, do we have to leave and sacrifice our day's sales in order to take this to a state park and gut it out? Or can we do it here? And he says, as long as you don't block the hall door, I don't give a damn, go right ahead. So we found a sturdy tree relatively near where our booth was going to be set up, and we start trying to drag it up into the tree, myself and an incredibly skinny 8-year-old all alone. I'm 5'3 3/4", by the way. I make 5'4" if I fluff my hair just right. And it was obvious that it was hard for us. And this guy comes sauntering over, and he gives me this really shifty look, and he says, you gonna butcher that deer? And I went, yeah, we hope to. And he says, I'm selling knives. Yeah, I'm selling cloaks. And he says, well, everybody's looking at the knives and they're saying, well, I don't know, they're so expensive, but they don't know how good they are. And I'm, okay. He says, would you mind if I butchered this deer? And my brilliant little son says, oh, you want to do our work for us? Yeah, I think we can deal with that. The second he puts his hands on the rope, 10 fighters are in a circle around him. You gonna butcher that deer? And we went back to our booth. We handed him the 2 coolers we had with us and the tarp and sold cloaks all day. Well, near the end of the day, he comes sidling over to us again. And he says, well, I got your coolers and I packed the ice and I packed the deer in the baggies. That's a brilliant idea, carrying baggies, you know. And we're like, yeah. And he says, you gonna do anything with the hide of that deer? And we said, well, we didn't have any plans. He says, oh, by the way, I sold 8 knives. Thank you so much. And Alex says, oh, you're welcome. And he says, so the hide? And we said, well, we didn't have any plans. He says, so I could have it? And Alex smiles beautifully and says, oh, you want to take away our garbage for us? I think we can deal with that. So if you're on the sheriff's call list, you can use the rib cage. Do not ever use the spine or skull. Never, ever, ever. There are no exceptions to this law. I am not joking. There's this thing called deer wasting disease. It is a prion. Prions cannot even be killed by fire. They are what viruses are going to be when they grow. They are what viruses was before it grew up. And they rot your brain into sponges and then kill you dead. And the whole process is hideous and takes years. You never know which deer has it. It is in the nerve tissue. The spine and the skull are utterly off limits.
Mad cow disease.
Pardon?
Mad cow disease.
Mad cow disease is a relative, yes. But the rest of it, if you are not a trained butcher, just cut each muscle loose from the skeleton until all you've got is a skeleton. Then take a hammer or whatever you've got, break the ribs away from the spine, break the pelvis off, smash up the leg bone so you get the marrow out of them if you're not going to carve them into sewing needles. And cook it down for broth, which if you cook it to a concentrate, you can freeze for the event. And for the scraps and bits, which again, you can freeze for the event. The meat itself, of course, you're going to eat yourself because that's the deal you make with the sheriff, is that one more poor family will have more decent food. And you don't cheat on that one, because you will get such a nasty poisonous reputation. They'll take you off the call list. They will blacken your name. They will blacken the SCA name. We don't want any of that. But they don't give a flying what you do with the bones after you've taken the meat off them. So venison gravy for this dish of venison and beef at the event. All right, it's 5% venison and 95% beef. Nobody cares. They hear the word venison and you suddenly are wearing a halo. Now, for chicken, even cheaper than a slaughterhouse. You go to a 4-H'er or to a hobby farmer, real farmers that do chicken for a living, like the guys that sign contracts with Tyson, stay away from them. They cannot even talk to you. But you tell them that I will buy 2 100-pound sacks of organic feed. That's about $70. one of them chick feed, and I will buy 25, or for a big feast, 50 newborn chicks. What you want is what's called the fly tire special or the color special from the hatchery. This is all the leftover chicks. They have to ship 25 together in order for their warmth to keep them alive while they're being mailed. So when they have 3 of this and 2 of that and only 1 of 5 other species, what do? Well, they sell them for peanuts as a fly tire special or a colorful feather special, sometimes called a front yard chickens special if you get a really weird hatchery. What it is it's all the leftovers. So for anywhere from $13 to under $20, you get a huge variety of different chickens with different feathers. This is going to matter later. He raises them for you. Now you swear to him up and down solemnly, and you keep your word that he gets to keep the hens if he wants them. Because the hens will lay at least some eggs, even if they're meat species. So they're worth keeping because they will attract people to stop at his farm stand. They'll see the chickens in the yard and go, "Oh, mommy, let's pull over. I want to see a chicken." So he will want the hens in almost every case. If he doesn't, he might charge you a little more. But if he does, and he often will, it saves you money. When the time comes, make arrangements the day you get those chicks to his farm to have them slaughtered if you're not going to slaughter them yourself. Because you want the slaughterhouse to be primed and ready so that there's no waiting and no fuss. When the time comes, which depending on the breed of chicken will be between 6 and 10 weeks old, the cockerels will be starting to crow. Any older, they're going to taste disgusting. You want to get them as soon as they stop being babies. And you slaughter them. Now, here's the fun thing. You take the skin off, feathers and all, have them not pluck them. You salt those skins. You can now sell them to fly tires for $10 each. A flock of 25 will probably only have 5 or 6 hens, so that's 20 $10 skins. 20 $10 skins means your $100 for the chickens and the shipping and the 2 bags of feed. You've made $100 profit. And you've got 20 chickens for your feast. I think that's a deal most people can get behind. Of course, if you have the space, and if you have a big cellar and your spouse is also in the SCA and understands, you can do this in a battery cage that you can buy on the internet and raise them for every feast every year until the end of forever. You just need to be sure you clean up after every time you slaughter them so that there's no leftover bad smell.
Water tub.
What?
Water tub.
Water tap?
Yeah, tub.
Oh, a water tub. No, you're not plucking them, so you don't need a tub. Come over here if you're talking. This is my housemate, Maria. She has done chicken slaughtering. Maria, explain what you're talking about.
You can get a 100-gallon water tub, plastic tub, to raise your baby chicks inside the house where it's nice and warm. Not just they don't merely have each other to keep each other warm. They have the warmth of the house. You can also add supplemental heat from a heat lamp, but it may not be necessary. At least not for more than a couple of weeks. Anyway, they grow so fast. I mean, you will see them like popcorn. Boop, 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 boop. And in fact, you have to be careful that you don't overcrowd them because they will
Need more space as they keep growing.
they will need more space. But when you buy these baby chicks one at a time in the feed store, you'll see them in a tiny water tub that is only a few inches high. They will graduate to a much bigger tub. They will grow. Plan on it. And oh yeah, they will. They'll grow.
If you really want to impress the hell out of people cheaply, you can do the same thing with quail. And quail are much quieter, much cleaner, much easier to keep in a cage in your cellar.
They grow
Again,
faster.
They grow faster. They're cheaper to
6
feed.
weeks.
6 weeks instead of 10, yes. And you serve quail at a feast with what quail costs to buy, their jaws are going to drop so far you'll have to issue a bandage for their chin as a feast token.
They're easier to slaughter too.
Yes, yes, they are. However, I don't know if you can sell the skins to fly tyers. Maybe you can, especially if you get weird quail. So anyway, sheep and goat, kids, you want to contact a shepherd well in advance, at least 6 months, and see if you can arrange to buy a weanling kid. If there's anyone here from a country that is not the US, I apologize. This is a problem the US had. Anything that is born of a sheep, no matter how old it gets, is lamb when it is sold as meat. Absolutely anything. Now, real lamb is in 2 categories. Weanling lamb, which has never had anything but mother's milk. Spring lamb, which has been on grass less than 3 months. And yearling lamb, which has been on grass more than 3 months, but is under a year old. After that, you have mutton. Mutton and lamb do not taste the same. Yes, there's a similarity. You can tell it's still a sheep, but they do not taste the same. And many people find mutton revolting. We don't know why. It's something in our taste buds that just says, this ain't food no more. What, are you weird? It might be an instinct bred into our shepherding ancestors that an animal that has lived to adulthood is supposed to be making you babies or making you wool. But whatever the reason is, lots of people cannot stand the taste of mutton, which is why American lamb has such a horrible reputation. So you talk directly to the shepherd and you demand weanling lamb. It'll be small. It'll be like 25 pounds total, of which less than 10 pounds is actually meat. But it will taste fantastic. For the same price of 1 leg of lamb from the supermarket, if you contact a shepherd a year in advance, he can breed an extra ewe that he would not normally breed because he knows ahead of time he's going to sell that lamb. And you can get a bargain rate price because he can plan for it. You might even be able to do 2 if you can go that far ahead of time. And you can roast that lamb whole, depending on how squeamish your group is. Some places will not put up with this. You have to know that. But you have your pastry cook make a pastry head. Trust me, do not bake a lamb's head. It doesn't work well. You can put it in soup, but don't try to bake it. And you can have the entire body roasted and then posed on a tray with the pastry head and dust toasted white flour and pepper mixture all over the rest of the lamb so that it's somewhat white again. And pose it as if it's sleeping. Trot it out on the great big tray, take it back into the kitchen and cut it up, serve it, dump all the bones in the soup. Yay! For less than the cost of the leg of lamb from the store. Sorry, my hearing aid is trying to leave home. Goat, do the same thing. Talk to the goat herd. Arrange in advance for goat. Again, kid goat does not taste the same as adult goat.
Especially if they're rain.
Bucks, especially a buck goat, an adult buck goat. Anybody who can eat that, I'm terrified. They had their taste buds shot off in the war. Now, if you castrate a buck that has been a stud for a couple of years and then raise him for another year till the hormones are out of his system, he tastes like any adult goat, big fat hairy deal. But get kid. People will eat kid. Call it mouflon. Don't call it kid. It makes them nervous. Mouflon means, no, mouflon is sheep. Chevaux, call it chevaux. That is goat in French. You're not lying to them. But make sure that you have on the menu that it says meat from a goat, because there's some pretty weird allergies out there. I'm allergic to lamb. So was my son. We found that out the first time we served him a spoonful of lamb at 10 months old. He pulled it out of his mouth and threw it right on the cat's nose. From that second on, that, as far as that cat was concerned, my son was a god, because if you hung around him, meat fell from the sky. Okay. If you live near a seacoast, you cannot pull this trick any place you cannot see the sea. Because it's a trick. It's a great trick, but modern food safety beats medieval pageantry all hollow. What you can do is get an entire fish, have them scale it without deheading it. And you can keep that thing on ice and build an armature out of boiled coat hanger wire. Do not use armor wire. Do not use fence wire. For the love of God and all his angels, don't use anything that has been plated with zinc. It not only will taste revolting, you'll make half your piece sick, but you can pose the fish as if it was still swimming on a water of cabbage leaves, especially blue cabbage leaves, because, really, and carry it around the hall saying, "The fish." And everybody goes, "Ooh, ah," and then you take it into the kitchen and carefully cut it apart and cook it. It used to be that there were a lot of things that you could do for presentation with raw animals that are not legal to do anymore. I made a heck of an impression by doing a sea pig, which was the front end of a piglet and the back end of an enormous Boston bluefish, minus the head, nestled together. And trotted out, they go, "Ooh," and then we took them into the kitchen and cooked the life out of both of them. I wouldn't do that anymore because somebody would probably arrest me. What can I say? We did learn this is potentially dangerous. Let's not, even though they did. Nowadays, you would want to have someone do the same thing in papier-mâché, paint it very realistically, get someone to 3D print a sea pig and paint it very realistically, whatever. But, okay, where are we? Okay, questions, because we've only got half an hour left. So more questions. Anybody?
Hi, yes. I just wanted to say, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. I downloaded your handout in 1994, and I have been following it and trying to live by its wisdom ever since. And the biggest impact for me was the concept of seasonality, which I hadn't really been aware of at that time. And also the idea of planning ahead so that ingredients you use for one dish, you can take leftovers and repurpose for the next and for more involved. And that's made a world of difference in pretty much every meal I've ever made since. So thank you.
Oh, bless thee. Do you happen to have it handy?
Actually, yes, I do.
Okay. Could you read the section about the 5 dishes from a chicken if you can find it quickly?
Certainly. Give me just a second to pull it up.
This is the ultimate advanced version of the bone out the chicken without cutting the skin thing. That I wrote about it in the article, but I don't always remember it right. The article I can proofread, and I do every 5 years to make sure nothing has proven to be idiotic since the last time I checked it. Because there is no one true way. Like, you don't make sea pigs out of real fish and real pigs anymore.
I see the spring chickens bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding too. It says spring chickens are delicious, but not very large. The big chickens that look good served whole are available cheaply only in late June, but that's no reason to do without. Buy the smaller whole chickens on sale and bone them out. Do something complicated and elegant with the white meat, something weird and fun with the drumsticks, and you still got enough parts left to make a total of 4 extra dishes from the stuff left on the plate or in the trash when you serve them whole.
Yeah. If you are going to cut up chickens, now the whole chickens, you do take the skeleton out of it. If you can, once you are really good at getting just the central skeleton out, try figuring out how to get the bones out of the legs and the bottoms of the wings. So that it is almost totally boneless except for the wingtips, because that's the real scare the life out of your carvers moment. But, and another thing you can do once you've gotten that good is you take the entire skin off and you stuff just the skin with a good stiff force meat of some kind, like just white meat from your other chickens. You have 5 chickens that are filled with spiced and flavored white meat that's been ground up and nothing else. And then you roast it, and imagine what happens when they go to cut those up. And then you take the now skinless, boneless chickens and you paint the outside of an endor made of egg yolk mixed with flour and spices, which when it cooks looks like a golden chicken skin.
Oh my.
So it looks like the skin is still on it, at least at first glance. And of course, you've turned the lights down because you're not that crazy, right? And then you've got all of the giblets. As I said, you keep the legs. If you get these from a butcher or a slaughterhouse, keep the feet, make them in a broth. You can make them into a great gravy type sauce for either of the above. All of the scraps on the meat can go into a pie or into a mince. The giblets can go into a broth, or there are some dishes in the period where they use the giblets for separate things. The livers can be made into a pate to put out with the dessert food during the dancing for people who hate sweets, or you can serve it to high table. And you have not paid an extra penny. And any fat that you want to get any excess fat off the skin before you stuff it, because it will slump where the fat was. Cook down the fat and put it in the pie crust for the chicken pies. It'll taste better. And again, you already paid for it.
Use the schmaltz.
Yeah, of course, use the schmaltz. By the way, many slaughterhouses will sell you amazing amounts of schmaltz for nothing if you do the cooking down. So you can have real chicken pie crust made with chicken fat. You can have schmear for your bread instead of schmaltz for your bread instead of butter. For the people who don't eat dairy, they'll be astounded to find a genuine medieval chicken fat with onions cooked into it until they fall to pieces.
You can have kosher.
Yeah, you could have a kosher dish.
Wow.
Several kosher dishes. And the 2 slaughterhouses I've talked to, they will sell you chicken fat for less than it would cost you to buy just the backs. And you can, by the way, buy the backs in 50-pound bags. And there's plenty of meat on a back. And boy, do those backs make great broth. So if you're cooking a really large feast, if you're cooking for 500, you can have people do that stuff ahead and bring in the blocks of broth frozen. One thing I highly recommend if you're doing this, it does mean you are probably going to want more heat sources than your average church hall kitchen has. Plug in 120-volt ovens, which are available cheaply at Christmas time, because for some reason apartment dwellers buy them to cook a turkey in and then give them to the secondhand stores. My brain won't go there, but it happens. Somewhere around January or February, those start coming cheap in the secondhand stores. Grab every one you can get. Every 120-volt circuit in that church is now a stove. They'll make you 5 to 10 gallons of broth. They'll make you 4 roast chickens. They'll make you 2 standing pies that tall on 120-volt circuits that are not connected to the stove. It's marvelous. You will need someone who has the space to store them, but I mean, if you're careful, if you choose the right shelves, you can get 4 or 5 of them in the back of a deep closet. So they're not that much space to take up. Or if your kitchen cabinets don't go all the way to the ceiling, you can line them up on your kitchen cabinets and have a great conversation piece when your friends come to visit.
Awesome.
Okay, now, even if you've done all of this, there's one more thing. Remember, an important part of what you're doing is fooling people's brains. They will think they're getting more food if they're getting more pageantry. So get all the teenagers in your barony or the young college types that don't really think that they know anything about cooking, but they want to help. Get 2 thrift store sheets in the right colors and make every one of them a baronial tabard. They don't have to look that great. You do not have to be a professional costumer. You don't have to be that good a seamstress or seamster. But guys in baronial tabards serving the food tastes better. And a thrift store sheet runs $4 to $5, maybe 10 if you live in New York City in the wrong parts. So for $20 total for tabards that'll last 6 years, all your food now tastes amazingly better, and people think that you're serving them glorious, expensive stuff when you're really getting 50 pounds of drumsticks. Just because of the pageantry. An incredibly important thing that costs almost nothing. Get a couple of glass punch bowls. The plainer, the better. The decoration is almost always wrong. You have to be careful with mushrooms. That's a comment says you can use dehydrated Asian market mushrooms as a thickener instead of gluten or corn. There are people with mushroom allergies, and some of them are very lethal. That's why I said never put the same food in everything. I don't care how good a bargain you got on cilantro. You do not put cilantro in every dish. Yeah. But yes, it will be a great thickener in a dish, but not in every dish, is what I'm saying. You always want to make sure that you have dishes as separate from each other in ingredients as you can so that the allergics can eat something. I am allergic to half the planet. You do not want to hear how many times I've paid good money to attend a famine. But on the subject of the punch bowls, get 2 for a small feast, 4 or even 6 for a really big one, punch bowls. Put them on tables, even rolling carts with a cloth over them, with one person with a pitcher and one person with a really long towel that goes over his shoulder from his knees in front to his knees in back. And he, well, maybe not quite that long, at least hip to hip, because what he's going to start with only a little bit of it over his shoulder. And the people come up into the feast hall, and right at the door, my lady, may I bathe your hands? And you pour that rose scented or mint scented or whatever, make sure it's a real natural scent. You don't even want to imagine how many people are allergic to artificial scents. They pour a little of that water on, and then the guy with the towel over his shoulder pulls it a bit forward and dries their hands for them and leaves it there. The next one, he pulls it a little more forward, dries their hands for them, and so on. And by the time it's all in front of him, he drops it discreetly under the table and flips a new one onto his shoulder and rinse, lather, repeat. You haven't even served them anything. They haven't even taken their seat. They already know they're going to get a great medieval feast. Their brains are already tasting glory because you have pre-programmed them just with that 15 cents for a couple of drops of essential oil trick. The other things you want to do is to have people primed. If you can have the servers trained ahead of time so that they kneel when they serve the high table, all the food tastes better because you don't kneel to serve McDonald's. You kneel to serve wonderful. So they're going to taste wonderful. Have the servers trained to be able to say quickly and smoothly, my lady, every ingredient is posted by the kitchen door. Go check. Anybody, anywhere, who ever tells me, or anybody who knows me, oh, well, I can't tell you my recipes. You'd steal them when I ask for ingredients as a feast. The defenestration of Prague is going to be reenacted as part of the historical ambiance. You can look up defenestration, but it does mean throwing people out of windows. I'm a Quaker in mundane life, so it'll be first floor windows. But there is no secret recipe at an SCA feast. If you can't bear to have anybody know what you put in your grandmother's soup, don't serve it. There's just too many allergies. There's too much risk. We so ain't going there. Post every ingredient for every dish with the same name that the herald is going to be announcing when it's brought in, next to the kitchen door, outside the kitchen door, so that they can read it for their own freaking selves, or the guy you've got guarding the kitchen door to keep them out can read it to them if they're illiterate. And yes, he should wear a tabard too, so they know he's official. But pageantry counts as much to the minds of your feasters as anything you put on the table. And it has as much effect on how they experience the flavors. Oh, one last thing. If you live in or near a big city, which some of you do, or even some small cities, the SCA has a tax-free nonprofit educational corporation tax number. Memorize it. Get your seneschal to write you a letter with that number on it. Go to the grocery stores, go to the butchers, go to the slaughterhouses. Every place you go, you have that tax number with you. You will not have to pay taxes if you happen to be unfortunate enough to live on a place where they actually tax food, which they so should not, but sometimes they do because there's nasty people on this planet. But you can also walk up to the produce department guy and say, look, we're a nonprofit educational corporation, and we're going to be cooking a feast from the 1400s, and we're inviting several students from the local college to attend as part of their history class. Can you people afford to donate anything? Here's the list of things we would like, and make the list a lot longer than what you already know you actually need. You might suddenly find yourself serving radish leaf soup because he's willing to give you 100 pounds of radish leaves free. Panera gives all their leftover bread to somebody, and food banks get an amazing amount of leftover bread. So if you can get Panera to give you tonight's leftover bread, wow, do you have a lot of extra bread for your feast? You didn't have to pay for it. The same with a huge variety of other things. If you have a recycling center, go to the recycling center with that tax-free number and explain to them how much you really can't afford a door to make a tray out of. It'll happen. Show them pictures of what you do with that tray, and the next time someone brings in an entire red theater curtain, they'll call you, and you will have red carpets for every barony in the kingdom. And then a year from now, the next barony over, you tell them to do that, and their recycling center calls them and said, some restaurant just brought in 30 dented pots, and you said your guys made armor. Yes, they do make armor, but they're not going to make it into armor. They're going to hammer out the dents for you, because good armorers hammer out dents, and you're going to have 30 new pots. And then you can swap half of them to the barony that got the red curtain lengths to cut up into red carpets. And yeah. But a lot of stuff that would otherwise be thrown away will get donated to you if you know how to ask. And an important part of knowing how to ask is simply making them feel good that they gave you what you wanted. Give them the pictures, tell them the stories, invite them to the events. The strangest people will suddenly become a future baroness. Manager of a spice store, was explained carefully with web pages and stuff why they really did want to order out asafoetida. I wouldn't eat asafoetida if you paid me money, but apparently there was a recipe for that included asafoetida. The spice store owner not only ordered it, she showed up wearing a bathrobe backwards and 16 scarves at the event to see what on earth you could do with that stinky stuff. Well, she tried. I mean, it's an attempt at garb. And as far as I know, she's still attending events, which means that people in her bounty get some amazing spices.
But he's a very smart kind soul. Said, "Oh, my lady, I would love for you to have."
Yeah, which means somebody probably loaned her a much better gown for her next event, just to make sure she stayed. Okay, how much time do we have left? It is 20:46. We have to close this out in 5 minutes. So last questions, suggestions, anything I didn't cover you wish I had, for anything you think I did wrong so that I don't do it wrong next time, please tell me, at least in the chat, if not on recording. I'm finished talking. You get to talk now. Please.
I got so much information floating around in my brain now. I gotta chew on it for a bit. Hang on.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. There's another article in the Florilegium. By the way, it's Florilegium, Florilegium. Stefan with a PH, Stefan's Florilegium. Rob Peter to feed Paul, put that part in quotes, and Warner's, Warners. Warners are a part of the class of disguised foods. I have to edit that because I recently found out that Warners are not always edible, just as subtleties are not always non-edible. New information. You may get better. But the Warner's article is about specifically disguising foods. It covers a lot more stuff than I did today. And the Rob Peter to feed Paul article includes other information that I probably skipped because my memory is not perfect. Trust me on this one, I'm really sure about that. And if anybody wants to leave something in the comments when this goes on YouTube, I will track it down. I will read the comments. I will answer if I can. But good luck. Go forth and stuff people. Ah, someone found it. Yay. Yeah, that's a general category, SCA feast. It'll be in there somewhere. But there's a lot of articles in there. You should probably just read them all.
How many of them did you write? I want to read your stuff.
Well, you can just look up my Monday name, which is HONOUR, capital HORNE hyphen or dash, capital JARUK. I'll see if I can type that in the chat.
Yes, please. I'm too slow.
Yeah. Okay, chat. Capital HONOUR HORNE JARUK. If you do a search under that name, you will find everything that is webbed. Okay, I'm sorry.
HONOUR. Are you kidding me?
No.
That is my daughter's name.
Huh. I picked it myself.
We actually named her after Honor Harrington.
Yes, but hers doesn't have a U in it.
We did that to sort of differentiate it.
Yeah. I get people looking at me, a fellow science fiction nuts looking at me all the time. How old are you? You named after Honor Harrington? And I'm like, no, I'm much older than she is. Considering she won't be born for another 3,000 years, I'm much older than she is. But I picked it myself because my mother named me Lochen Terez. If your mother named you Lochen Terez, wouldn't you
Okay.
do something desperate?
Can kind of understand that. But the
Yeah.
funny thing is, the day after she was born, my mother was trying on some, they went into Sears to buy stuff for me, but she wound up going in to try stuff on for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And someone came in going, Honor, are you in here? And she barely resisted saying, no, she's still at the hospital.
Oh,
I had
She-
aunts. It's a very dangerous thing to have aunts because your mother may name you after them.
But
And I was a grown up before I learned how their names were actually pronounced. When I was a kid, I thought it was a relatively innocuous Lorraine.
for the longest time, she resented it because she was going, my name is just a word. But then, you know, she got old enough that we go, look, here's Honor Greenman, you know, an noted actress.
Should I stop the
No,
recording
another
now?
one.
Yeah, we just